All right, everyone, we're going to close up the week with a brief video. Just want to wrap up what we've covered and then end with a brief synopsis of the apology, and that'll give you a sense of, and hopefully by this time you will have read the apology. And then I just want to distill a couple of key ideas from that work. So you probably had a sense hopefully, of what philosophy was in the early days, right? The ancient Greek tradition, and studying the pre-Socratic philosophers, certainly jumping into Socrates, you get a flavor of what philosophy was like. And for some of you, this might feel like really strange ideas, especially with the pre-Socratics. And just keep in mind, this is the very first steps of human beings in a particular civilization seeing the world very differently and using a method that very much, or a strategy, or a process of thinking, I'm not sure what to describe it as just yet, that is very much still with us today. And some of the Greeks were onto something. Right, certainly the atomists were on to certain things that we still might carry on with us. And of course, the figure Socrates, such an enigmatic and important figure, and getting us to think deeply about the turn in philosophy as he sees it from analyzing the natural world, or what we might call more metaphysical kinds of things, to an examination of the self, the kind of life that a human being should be living. So I want to conclude this week by summarizing or going into a little bit more detail of Plato's Apology. And let me just bring up the screen here, and I'm going to walk us through the reading. And you should have this. Again, if you haven't read it, I would just pause the video at this point and do a quick read if you can. Several of the quiz questions are based on the apology, so this will be helpful for the quiz. Now, let me position the apology in Plato's work. So the apology is an early dialogue, and it's a part of usually four. It comes in a group of four dialogues, and the Euthyphro, then there's the apology, and the Euthyphro, as you saw, is Socrates awaiting his trial, and he engages in that question of piety with Euthyphro. The apology then is the actual trial where Socrates gives his defense. Again, the word apologia, to defend or defense, and that is not an apology that I'm making, but I'm giving a defense of my position. And then after that is the Credo and the Phaedo, and these two dialogues we're not going to explore, but typically in Plato's work they're grouped together, and they position Socrates as a critical figure, and his ideas are coming forward in a more in-depth way. We get, as we'll see today in this video, you'll see a couple of really important ideas that come out of that. But it's not until Plato's middle dialogues that Plato's own philosophy, even though Socrates is still the central figure in his dialogues, that Plato's mature thought begins to evolve. And this is in his great work, The Republic. We will discuss Plato next week, and we're going to see how the Republic is taking Socrates even further, and at that point you can see where it's Plato's own ideas that begin to emerge. Okay, let me get down to, I'm going to scroll through here, and I'll let you read that introduction on your own. It's just Socrates setting up, or Plato setting up the defense here, and what I've done in this particular draft is highlight what I feel are key components of the text that you might want to zero in on. And first and foremost is exactly what are the charges that are being made against Socrates. And you can see where he has a couple of, we'll call them adversaries. I think in here the word enemy is used a couple of times. In philosophy, we would say the interlocutors. In this case, These are people who are very serious to bring charges against him. And the two main charges were this, and here's a little line that sort of describes that. The line basically is, Socrates is an evildoer, a curious person who searches into things under the earth and in heaven, and he makes the worse appear the better cause, and he teaches the aforesaid doctrines to others. And that's a summation of the accusation, as Socrates goes on to say. And the two charges that came up against him were that he refused to recognize the gods of the state. That was number one. And ironically, we're going to see in the Apology where Socrates' whole mission is based on what he understands the God to be telling him. And so that's something that you want to check on, or at least pay attention to. The second charge is that he was corrupting the youth, and God forbid, somebody corrupts the youth by teaching them how to think critically about their lives and about the world in which they live. So those are the two charges that come against Socrates, and the Apology is his attempt to explain to his accusers and to the jury why I am this way. He's saying, why do I do this? Why do I go about the world? Why do I go into the city-state and teach, and I'll put that in quotes, teach people how to self-examine? So this is really a chance for us to get a glimpse into the Socratic mission. The Socratic mission to philosophize, which isn't for him, sort of finding a cave somewhere and, reflecting or going deep into the mind. For Socrates, it's an encounter. Philosophy is engaging. It's meant to be dialogical. It's only through the dialogical process, as we'll see in a bit, that truth can be known, truth can be attained. And so you need a partner, you need a conversation to happen. And this is the emphasis on dialogue. Again, we'll see that in a bit. So I highlighted here in this paragraph on my page 2, if you're following along, that Socrates is, that the accusation is that he's a teacher and that he takes money. And you can see right away where the accusation is trying to show that Socrates is very much like a sophist. And Socrates is going to deny, first of all, that he takes money for his services. And he says, my poverty should be ample evidence of this, but also that he's a teacher. And this is an interesting question that we should be asking. Socrates is going to deny, on the one hand, that he is a teacher in that sophistic sense, but that he clearly is teaching something. And even in this text, he talks about his own teaching. And this is something that you're going to have to deal with, right? So what exactly is Socrates teaching? He's not teaching very explicit kinds of things. He's not pointing to something with his interlocutors, with the people that he engages, and teaching them a skill, or teaching them, something like doctoring or whatever, a techne, remember that term. But that he is, but he's teaching them something. And that's what we want to sort of, sit with, in the not teaching, that is through the dialogical engagement. You are learning something, right? Socrates isn't giving you, a direct message per se in the dialogue. It's in the question and answer. And you saw this a little bit with the Euthyphro, that the questions generate ideas and responses. And in that process, you learn something. And so Socrates is a teacher, of course, in that to that extent. But he's not a teacher in the sense of what a sophist would be. And that's something we want to distinguish. Okay, let's continue on. And here's where things get a little strange. And for some of you, you're like, what is this all about? The god of Delphi, also known as the Oracle of Delphi. Well, and pardon me, I have allergies, so I'm going to be coughing and sneezing a little bit as we go through this. So one of the key pivotal moments in the text is exactly why, and Socrates in his explanation, why he's doing what he's doing. Well, it stems from the message of the god of Delphi. his friend Chaerephon. Lots of fancy names in this text that are really hard to pronounce, Greek names, ancient Greek names. Chaerephon, a friend of Socrates, he says, who claimed that in receiving a message from the Oracle of Delphi, Delphi was a place that people could go if they made an appropriate sacrifice. They would get an answer, usually in the form of a riddle to their question. And in this case, the god comes forward and says that Socrates is the wisest of men. And Socrates is very struck by this because this is something called Socratic irony. He doesn't think that he is wise. He believes that he is ignorant of wisdom. And in the discussion board, I posed the question to you, what exactly is wisdom? How could Socrates make this claim? What is the difference between wisdom and knowledge? What is human wisdom, as Socrates talks about in this text? And what is divine wisdom? Okay. The god of Delphi tells Chaerephon that Socrates is the wisest of men. And Socrates is struck by this. Right? So let's go down to the second paragraph here. After he tells the story, he says, "What can the god mean?" This is the beginning of that yellow section there. Here, I'll put my cursor on it right there. There we go. "And what is the interpretation of the riddle?" Again, the oracle speaks in a riddle. "For I know that I have no wisdom." Interesting, right there. I know that I have no wisdom. He has knowledge of the fact that he does not possess wisdom, small or great, human or divine. What can he mean when he says that I am the wisest of men? And yet he is a god and cannot lie. Okay? That would be against his nature. After a long consideration, I at last thought of a method. That's one of the questions that I posed in that other document. By the way, you can find this reading in files under readings, week 2, and I'll start populating the weeks with various readings and questions for you to follow. And one of the questions that I pose in there is the method that Socrates comes up with to try to get an answer to this question. What could the god mean? And the method, again, that he describes or that he puts into play is the dialectic. The dialectic is when two people come into a conversation. A person poses a question to the other, that person responds. And in the dialectic, if I was at a whiteboard, I'd be drawing this. In the dialectic, one person speaks, the other person responds, etc., and you move up, and it's an upward ascent, and you get to the truth of the thing that you're asking a question about. In this case, and Plato is going to take that to its extreme. In this case, Socrates is simply saying that the method that I've employed is to examine people who claim to be wise. And in that examination, I demonstrate that they, in fact, are not wise. And he's going to go to as many people as he possibly can and do the work of philosophy to examine the claims that are being made by certain people who claim wisdom and to show that they, in fact, don't have the wisdom they claim. And so we see a couple of examples. He goes to politicians, he goes to an artisan, etc. And let's see if I can, let's go down to what page are we on? It must be 4. And another highlighted list or section. Go I must to all who appear to know and find out the meaning of the oracle. And I swear to you, Athenians, by the dog I swear, for I must tell you the truth. The result of my mission was just this. I found that the men most in repute were all but the most foolish, and that some inferior men were really wiser and better. I will tell you the tale of my wanderings and of the Herculean efforts. Hercules, of course. Plato is very fond of ancient Greek myths. He will bring them in constantly. And Hercules, of course, is one of those. Herculean labors, as I call them, which I endured only to find at last the oracle irrefutable. And so politicians, artisans, etc. And here's one of the key ideas you want to take away from from the Apology. And let me I'm just going to read this passage directly, and the bolded part is where you want to really focus on. The investigation has led to my having many enemies, and this is why he's on trial, of the worst and most dangerous kind, and has given occasion also to my calumnies. And I am called wise, for my hearers always imagine that I myself possess the wisdom which I find wanting in others. But the truth is, O men of Athens, that God only is wise. Right there, Socrates is giving us a distinction between divine wisdom and human wisdom. And in this oracle, he means to say that the wisdom of men is little or nothing. And ask, kind of right here, ask yourself this question. Socrates, in the ancient world, philosophy was it wasn't just a pastime. It was a way of life. And if you sort of read the passage this way, that it was a mission, it was a way of life, it was something that one was, I don't want to sound too religious with this word, but think of it as kind of a calling to do this. You cannot do otherwise. And this notion of that what Socrates basically points to, that there's divine wisdom only for God and human wisdom. There's something that limits us as human beings, right? In our techne, our technical skills of being experts at something, and our ability to even teach virtue or to self-examine. This is a limited process. But unlike the sophists, Socrates believes this is still worthy of pursuit. This is something that we should be doing as human beings, and that this truth is discovered. Okay, I'll continue. That only God is wise, that the wisdom of men is little or nothing. He is not speaking of Socrates. He is only using my name, the God is, as an illustration. Okay? This is what he discovers. As if he said, he, O men, is the wisest, who, like Socrates, knows that his wisdom is in truth worth nothing. So here's one of the key insights of Socratic philosophizing. The person who is wise, this is the answer to the riddle as well. The person who is wise is somebody who knows that they know nothing. You come to the realization that you are a human being. You are limited. What you're after is only for the gods. Okay? And when you realize that the things that you, quote, claim to know, or that the expertise or the wisdom that you have is limited, and you really know nothing when it comes down to it. The way of thinking about it is, a person who really digs deep in a particular discipline, if you've done something like that, or a skill, you begin to recognize that you're just scratching the surface, even though people might recognize you as knowing a lot about certain things of that skill or that piece of knowledge. But you've come to the realization that, wow, there is so much more to know. That's just an analogy for me to get people to sort of think about what Socrates is after. The more you do this, the more you philosophize, the more you realize, I know nothing, really. And you could add a couple of things to this, and then people have interpreted Socrates many, many times. But this is just something to chew on. The person who is wise knows that they know nothing, and sort of sit on that, sort of think about what that means. Okay, that's the first real big nugget. And of course, this notion of shame comes up, and Socrates, do you feel ashamed by the kind of person that you've become, etc. And let me just jump down to a good section here. So bottom of page 5. So this is a really interesting turn that Socrates makes. He's being accused of not, or being asked, I should say, are you ashamed of this? And Socrates wants to turn that around. You know what, people, you should be ashamed. Not me. You should be ashamed for what you're about, and not what you should be about. So let me find, so I'm going to go right here where it says, oh, my friend, start with that. Oh, my friend, why do you, who are a citizen of the great and mighty and wise city of Athens, care so much about laying up the greatest amount of money and honor and reputation? I mean, here he's talking to the jury. He's talking to his accusers, right? This is his defense. He's turning things around. And so little about wisdom and truth and the greatest improvement of your soul, which you never regard or heed at all. Are you not ashamed of this? And if the person with whom I am arguing says, yes, but I do care, I do not depart or let go at once. I interrogate and examine and cross-examine him. Again, that's his method, the cross-examination. This is, by the way, if I haven't said it yet, this is what we call the Socratic method, the cross-examination process. And if I think that he has no virtue, but only says that he has, I reproach him, and with undervaluing the greater and overvaluing the less. So he continues there. Let me, and then just continue down where it says, for I do nothing but go about persuading you. So this is how Socrates understands himself, and really his chief concern. For I do nothing but go about persuading you all, old and young alike. And again, if you know a little bit more about the Platonic dialogues, Socrates engaged older people very differently than he engaged younger people. With younger people, he was more of that patient, I'm just going to do this Q&A, because the younger people don't know what they need to know yet. And teaching virtue is something that needs to be facilitated. For older people, he's a little harsher. And this is where that harshness is kind of coming out. So he says, old and young alike, not to take thought of your persons and your properties. Interesting. But first and chiefly to care about the greatest improvement of your soul. I tell you that virtue is not given by money, but that from virtue come money and every other good of all man, public as well as private. This is my teaching. Okay? If Socrates has a teaching, this is it. And if this is the doctrine which corrupts the youth, again, he's challenging the accusation here, my influence is ruinous indeed. But if anyone says that this is not my teaching, he is speaking an untruth. So in this statement that Socrates is making a defense, the most important thing he says a human being can do, this is the purpose of your life. He would say this in a kind of universal, ahistorical sense, regardless of time and place. Every human being, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, don't worry. Why are you giving energy to things about, he calls them your persons or your properties? Think about the distractions that we do in our lives, or the ambitions or the goals that we have to have a reputation, to have status, etc. Socrates would say, that is nothing. That is on the level of what we would call human wisdom, and it's not even worth pursuing. In fact, it distracts you, Socrates would argue, from the chief concern of your life, which is to improve your soul. Again, soul isn't this sort of Christian soul notion. Of course, this is hundreds of years prior to the Christian tradition. But Socrates is talking about your mind. He's talking about the truest part of yourself, your essence. Your essence is your soul. And that's what you need to be working on, not these other things. These other things are simply, as we're going to find out next week in Plato's language, shadows. Okay, so here, that's one of the big ideas. A couple more ideas, and we'll shut this down. So one of the things that Socrates, he's on a roll here in the text. You should be ashamed, and here's what you should be concerned about. And so in this section, I won't read the whole thing here. This is the term that's bolded here, a gadfly. The notion of a gadfly comes up, and this is so important in political philosophy. What Plato pens here, that societies, to use Socrates' language, that are sleeping, that don't care about the things they should be caring about. And for Athens at the time, it was about reputation, wealth, prestige, status, etc. Whatever society you're talking about, Socrates is going to say, you shouldn't kill me. And the reason why you shouldn't kill me is because I'm a gadfly. And gadflies are important. They're important for society. They reproach society. They persuade society to be better than what they are. I can't help it. Let me go down and just read a section here. I'm going to highlight it so you know where I'm at. There we go. We'll just bold that whole thing. I dare say that you may feel irritated at being suddenly awakened. That's the sort of imagery of sleeping and awakening. Awakening. Socrates is going to accuse Athens of sleeping, that the citizens are sleeping. I'm here as a gadfly to wake you up. Okay? Awakened when you were caught napping. And you may think that if you were to strike me dead, as Anytus advises, which you easily might, then you would sleep on for the remainder of your lives, unless God in his care of you gives you another gadfly. A gadfly is somebody who, if I remember right, it is those little bugs that sort of fly around the horse, and the horse is sort of waving the fly. That's the gadfly. The gadfly is constantly probing. Socrates is a gadfly in the sense that he takes a look at Athens and he says, what are you? What have you been? What should you be? My role here, walking these streets, persuading you, reproaching you, and this is an irritation to you, just like a gadfly is to a horse, is necessary. Think of gadflies in our own lifetime, or gadflies critical to our own history in the United States. If you want to see a Socratic figure, who are the gadflies in history? Right? I'll let you think about that. Can you identify certain people? Okay. And this Socratic figure, and I'll just make a broad comment here, in the Judeo-Christian Western tradition, gadflies appear all the time. Okay, I don't want to spend too much time. Those are some of the big ideas there. Let me just conclude by just asking this question: this idea of death in philosophy? According to Socrates, what do you think he thinks about death? If you're living the philosophical life, then what is death to you? Well, for Socrates, we get a sense clearly that he doesn't worry about death. In other dialogues, he would describe the philosophical life as a preparation for death. In here, it is worse to fear that you haven't fulfilled your mission. If you haven't fulfilled your mission, then there's something you should be worrying about. But if you've done according to what the God has said about you, then there's nothing to fear. But there's a lot more I can say about death. But let's just go ahead and stop right there. So hopefully you got a better sense of who Socrates is and what his key ideas are. Again, the Apology is such an important work in the philosophical literature. If it was difficult to read, it's okay to read philosophy once or twice. If you still walk away and go, I still don't know what that was about, I'm not sure, let's go back and forth and via email. Happy to do a Zoom if you'd like, and we can talk about some of these ideas. But spend time with it. Philosophy is meant to be read slowly, and don't rush through it. Chew on some of the ideas, kind of sit there and let it stew for you. Okay, everyone, we will stop right there and look for week 3 starting next week. And good luck with the quiz.